Welcome to the Golden Mike Podcast, where personal growth simply isn't enough. I'm your host, Marc, Cordon, a positive psychology coach, a do-gooder from the island of misfit toys who founded the Joy Revolution. Each week I'll wrap with an extraordinary guest doing extraordinary things through their own revolutionary work to talk about the ups, downs, and all-arounds of life. It's my mission to provoke and empower you through increased joy and inspire you to spark your own revolution to change history for the better. Welcome to the most serious happiness podcast in this multiverse. Welcome to the Golden Mike Podcast. All right, welcome back to another Golden Mike Podcast. It's your boy, Marc Cordon. We are with Gorge Andriopoulos today, 40-year-old Gorge Andriopoulos. You don't look like it a day past 47, Gorge.
I don't feel it. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, and we're here in the Farmingdale studio, which is absolutely brilliant, man.
Thank you, brother.
We've got these. We literally have Golden Mike set up all around the room. If you're tuning in, we're talking about not only joy today, but also the revolution of leadership with Gorge. Now, Gorge, I know you grew up Greek Orthodox here in Farmingdale, right?
Yeah, I did.
And you know, I was at your birthday party last night, and I saw you. I think that was a whirling dervish outfit that you were in, was it?
Something like that. That was my traditional Greek officer.
So did you grow up at like super Greek Orthodox? Is that the way that it went down?
Yeah, it was Greek school every Monday. Right, it was like 4 to 7 every single Monday during the school year, 1st through 7th grade.
Okay.
Sunday school every week, and yeah, super Greek household. My Greek grandmother lived with us my entire life, and we had those traditional Greek values in the house, and it was your typical My Big Fat Greek Wedding. If you've watched that, yeah.
Well, I feel it's sort of the traditional Greek and the traditional Filipino. There's an intersection there, right?
There definitely is.
I feel like there's this idea of family. Right, hardcore. Yeah,
hardcore.
There's a whole respect for filial piety, family, parents. Were you the good boy growing up, man?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. I handled it pretty well. I was the good boy, I guess, until my college years, and then. Acted out a little bit, but yeah, I was.
And then
boy.
you fell off the rails.
A little bit.
Now, I do have to ask. In Florida, we have this big day where you throw the cross in like this deep ocean, right? And then you have to dive for it. Like I can't imagine doing that in Farmingdale. Is that something that happened?
No, it did not.
No, it didn't. Or you did not. Or did they do that up here? I forget what it's called.
I think so, but no, nothing. I was involved. We were not that hardcore.
We were not that hardcore.
My family's funny. So in the Greek Orthodox community, I don't even want to say the Greek Orthodox community because we weren't super religious people. For us, it was more. Religion is rooted in tradition a lot, as is just the Greek culture in general.
Right.
And so tradition is very important to us.
Right.
Whether we were super religious or not, I mean, once I was finished with Sunday school, we kind of fell off going to church every week, and I was working at a deli when I was a kid every Sunday. So, but the mainstays of the Greek tradition were what my family really valued. My dad had a brother and two brothers and a sister. And so with my parents, my mom actually isn't Greek. She's Yugoslavian, Serbian.
Okay.
But she sort of assimilated into the Greek culture. She's also Eastern Orthodox, so it's the same religion. But she sort of assimilated into the Greek culture very early on when she met my dad, and they got together. And so it just became a Greek house. And, the religion part, like I said, wasn't really a huge deal to us, but the traditions of the Greek community and the Greek culture were very important to my family.
How have you seen that carrying forward as you've become a father in your own family? And that's, your wife is not Greek Orthodox, right? And how do you see those values coming forward?
Yeah. So it's tough because, as you know, I'm divorced and remarried. So my 2 children are from my first marriage, and my ex-wife was Catholic, as well as my current wife is Catholic. So my kids were baptized in the Catholic Church. So they're growing up Catholic, and I'm super happy and proud of that because, you know, their mom goes to church every Sunday. So it's, as long as they're sort of getting that religious education and some sort of faith, I'm fine with it. But I will say that there are these proud moments of when they do turn to the Greek culture and sort of follow some of those traditions. It's a really cool moment for me.
Yeah.
Like even for me, I don't go to church barely ever. Easter's a big time for us. Right? Easter's a huge time. So this whole Lent for Greeks is, there's a fast involved. There's no meat, no dairy for the entirety of Lent, 48 days or something. And so I follow that because it's just sort of my time to kind of jump back in and just, I don't know, have some kind of faith, right? And so that last week leading up to Easter for us is we're at church 3 out of the 7 nights. There's really cool, like, you know, candlelight vigils and marches around the church. And it's kind of cool tradition. It brings me back to when I was a kid. And so my kids always come to that. It's great. That's the one cool part about being in 2 households of divorce is like, there's Catholic Easter and there's Greek Easter for them. So they get to celebrate both of them. And, you know, seeing my son and my daughter out there with their candles when they're singing like the Easter song at midnight the night before Easter. It's cool. It really is cool.
Now, you don't have your kids in whirling dervish outfits, do you?
No, I would never do that.
You wouldn't haze them like that?
No, never. Nor would they let me.
Well, I think back to, you know, sort of my own life and how this relates to myself as a dad. You know, I grew up very, very Catholic, very Filipino. And, it was almost like a badge of shame when my girlfriend and I, or my ex at the time, or my ex now, had a little one, an unplanned little one on the way. And it went against all things Catholic, all things Filipino. And then when I went to tell my folks, like, they stormed out of the room, George.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, and here I was, this guy in therapy trying to reconcile what it was like being Filipino and American, or, you know, growing up in America. And it was funny because my sister intercepted my my mom as she ran out, and my sister was pretty PO'd as well. They came back with a rack from, like, I don't know, like one of those, you know, off the rack clothing stores. Mm-hmm. And it was a whole rack of Superman clothes for the baby. And so just like that, it's funny how quickly you can let go of tradition when you see future, you know, coming forward. I know in your, you know, I know in your business with Launchpad and with your Launchcast that you host, you talk about that spark moment, right?
Yeah.
And I think for my family, that was their spark moment. We can continue going on with these traditions in which we don't even think about, or we really can embrace something that's very new and almost transcends being Filipino or being an American.
Sure.
It still is family.
Sure.
And so it was really cool to see my family, which I thought would never change, and I had to change for them, come around for that, you know? Well, what about you? What about with your own family? Like, what aside from religious values, what about the sort of cultural values of Greek? And I know your wife Colleen is she's a part Taiwanese, right? She's half Taiwanese, half Irish or something.
Irish plus, we'll call it.
Irish plus. Irish plus. You know, how has that been blending those values together for you?
Yeah, you know, for me, it wasn't even an issue for me. It never was even a thought in my head, right? It's somebody that I met that I really aligned with and clicked with. And so when I saw that future, immediately I was like, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for this future. It's kind of a weird situation when you're in a situation of divorce, like every dynamic of it, right? Because my parents sort of went through the mud with me, you know, during the time of the divorce. It was a super difficult and emotional time for everybody. And, you know, coming from a traditional family, that divorce isn't really a word that you use too much, right? And so they were upset initially at the very beginning of the divorce process, and then jumped in and supported me, right? And they were there for me the entire time.
What were they upset about?
I think it was more me, I think it was more some of the circumstances that led to splitting up were definitely on me. And so I think they were just a little disappointed in the person that I was at that time, which you and I have talked about. I wasn't a fan of that person. And so I think just the circumstances of the situation were upsetting to them. But then, then there's that moment where you see your kid really hurt.
Right.
And just like when I see my kids hurt, everything changes for me. It doesn't matter. And so they saw that and they were kind of like, yeah, okay, let's move on now. Let's move on. Let's get you through this.
Right.
And so that was one of those moments. But what happens then is what's kind of cool is now you get your life back on track to that place where you find some kind of normalcy and, develop a new relationship and get serious. And I took my time this time. And when I finally got engaged and got married, they were totally on board. And it wasn't even a question. It was like, yeah, she's a great person. You're happy. Great match for you.
And my friend, mixed Asian babies are the way to go.
Beautiful kids.
That is the future. That is the launch pad right there.
Beautiful kids.
I'm you brought up this idea of there was a George back then that you didn't like. If it's cool with you, I'd like to explore that George.
Yeah.
Because I've only known this George in front of me right now. Well, number one is, at the time, did you not like that George, or are you saying that in retrospect, that now that you see where you are and maybe the progress you've made, you look back at that George and you're like, I didn't like that George? Or was it something when
it's both?
Talk about that.
It's both. It's I think I've always been smart enough to know who I am at that very moment. I think I was a little bit blinded back then just by who I was. Part of the problem was that I was just this one-dimensional person that thought in a very specific way, almost tunnel vision. So it's like, that people aren't reacting to you the way that you would like. That people may be uncomfortable in front of you. You're not making people feel a certain way in a positive way. And you feel that vibe from other people. But back then I would just push it off as like, yeah, they're wrong. It's not me, it's them. But in reality, I knew it was me. Now, 10 years later, I'm a very introspective person. I'm traumatized by the person I was back then because of the series of events that followed. And so I think that trauma has always sort of put this guard up for me since then, once I really started changing, that I never wanted it to happen again. So if I see one sort of remnant of that person showing up, which he does all the time, it's part of me. It's not, I'm not going to get rid of that. Part of that was my rage. Part of that was my, the way I dealt with situations. Part of that was my stubbornness, my pride. So all these things are still there. You keep them at bay. You learn to manage them in a different way. You learn what's important to you. But when they come out, I'm always on guard, like, I can't let that guy back in.
Yeah.
I can't let that guy back in.
Well, I'm teaching a course right now called Into the Shadows, and that's really what happens when your shadow personality takes over. It's almost like you can't control that anymore, there's this really cool tarot card. I don't know if I'm going to go to Greek hell because I'm bringing up the tarot cards, but there's this really cool tarot card called Strength. And it's in many decks, it's this woman that's taming a ferocious lion, and the lion is just chill, and in many ways, with what we're doing in the shadow camp and what I hear you talking about is, really it's about us taming that ferocious lion, and then the lion will come out when need be. But we don't need to chew everybody up just for the sake of it. I'm curious, again, you talk about some parts of this being traumatizing for you. Was this with your sort of, your social relationships? Was this what was going on with work? Was this because I have an idea?
All of it. Yeah. Okay. My social relationships were horrible. I was this persona that I had back then was this larger than life version of me. It was the you can't bully me version of me. I'm just going to bully you ahead of time so that I don't get bullied. Right. That was really that's what that was about for me deep down. And so it was always, if I got angry at something, it wasn't like, well, let me just let it go, or come on, man, stop doing that. It was more like, I'm going to rip your head off and shove it up your ass. And, it was more that kind of reaction every single time. And that was never me. That was just a version of me that was trying to.
It was go big or go home with you, huh?
Go home. It was just like this version of me that was trying to be a tough guy, trying to make myself feel better about my own insecurities.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, oftentimes when people intercept or say, you can't bully me, so what I'm going to do is go on the offense, it's often because they've been bullied in the past.
Oh, totally.
You were bullied?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In a few different ways.
Okay.
Not sort of physical bullying. A lot in early school.
Okay.
I was an awkward kid growing up, and so the name calling and all that kind of stuff was never really easy on me. And then, without getting too much into it, growing up in a traditional non-English household, they have different ways of doing things. And so the discipline that goes along with that, the way we always talk about Greek guilt, right? Greek mom guilt, things like that. That stuff is, it's a funny way of parenting.
I'm beginning to think about I don't think there's any culture that uses that guilt and shame that doesn't use it. You know.
Yeah. Well, the Catholic guilt, right?
Oh, I had double trouble. Yeah. It was Catholic guilt and Filipino guilt. Do you know what we did to come to this country, son? I was like, oh God, okay. Yeah. I'll become a doctor.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story with that. So, they always used fear and guilt, the Greeks, right? In that culture. So there's actually this mythical or imaginary character. The word for it is babula. Babula is really like monster, it means, I think. Monster, ghostly monster, something like that. So it was like when you were a kid and you weren't doing something that your parents wanted, they would be like, the babula is going to get you. And you're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I don't want to die.
Amazing. Well, mine was, it wasn't the babula. It was the police. My parents.
The police is coming.
And they would go to the other side of the room if I wouldn't go to bed, and they'd scratch the wall.
Oh my God. That's horrible. You win.
Yeah. There we go. The shame and guilt Olympics. Philippines takes gold. Absolutely. You were talking again. I wanted to go to that idea of trauma, and then you were talking about being bullied. What was? Again, I want to use your own terminology here. What was your spark moment that got you out of being that George to moving into a direction where you are now this George?
Yeah, it was, I won't get into all of the horrible stuff that happened in my 30th and 31st.
Oh my God, this guy's probably signed so many non-disclosures because he's not getting into anything with me right today.
It's just, it's like personal stuff that I feel comfortable talking about the situation itself, sort of surrounding the person I was. But, it's this situation where I was at the top of my game, or at least I thought I was. It was like this invincible version of myself professionally, which had a lot.
And this was in pharma.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was, a big part of me back then. It was like my professional identity to me was so big, and just showing everybody how good I can be, how much great stuff I can do. And I was at this high point, the top of the mountain. And then it's like a few weeks later, I'm sitting in a house alone with no wife, no kids, everybody's gone, no job. And it was kind of like, it was so traumatizing because you turn around and you're like, what the hell just happened? A month ago, I was the shit.
Yeah.
Now I am complete shit. It was very strange. And so it's that I'm not a big fan of the analogy of breaking somebody and then building them back up. I don't like that type of behavior, that army mentality. Yeah. But that's what happened to me. I sort of needed it. I needed to be broken.
Right. Would you consider that the low part of your life?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not, and me, I don't have a depressive type of personality. So up until that point,
I actually wish you were more depressive.
I didn't understand depression, really. Yeah. I didn't understand it at that point. When people talked about, you even talk now, you talk about mental health stigmas. I was that guy that I stigmatized it because I would hear about mental health issues and depression and I was like, ooh, weak.
Yeah. It's weak. Or I don't have the tinfoil on my head. I'm just going through a funk right now.
Yeah. And I didn't understand it until that moment. And it was like that first year of just this new normal. It was strange, man. It was strange. I really was depressed. I felt it. At a certain point, I was depressed for a little while. And then I realized I was depressed and I was like, oh shit, this changes everything. Mm-hmm. I get it now. I understand. And so there was this point where I literally had nothing. And I made the conscious decision that I needed to rebuild. I needed to rebuild in a very specific way. And that started with just focusing on my kids first because I knew they were going to be the foundation of this new life, this new old version of me.
How old were they then?
They were 1 and 3.
Oh, okay.
1 and 3, very little.
Yeah.
And so I knew they were going to be the basis, the foundation of this rebuild. And the first step was just saying hey, I just need to be there as a dad as much as I can be. I need to be, class dad. I need to go on all the field trips. I need to have the kids as much as possible and put them before everything. And so that started. And then it was working on my interpersonal relationships with my partner, my friends, my, everybody and my parents. And when that sort of started coming back up, that's when I started feeling like there was some semblance of normalcy back in my life.
So there was even a rut with you and your parents at that point. I mean, when you talk about it, I don't want to call that hitting rock bottom, but that was a low for you. I mean, really, a lot of your interpersonal relationships were damaged. It wasn't a few of them. I think one of the things that I'm really picking up on, which is very cool. And did you get therapy during this?
Later on,
okay. And is that one of the things when you go into sort of not a full-on depressive state, but when you start to go and you start to do the backslide, right, into maybe some languishing, is to start giving to others.
Yeah,
starting to give to others is one of the most powerful ways of really getting yourself out of your backslide, because what happens is that your ego gets out of the way. The woe is me shit gets out of the way, and you can start serving others and being like, oh, I have value in the world. I have esteem. And then going into that sort of interpersonal piece, it doesn't seem, and I do talk about this. I think you know this. I talk about this in the Joy Revolution. And every now and then, if someone comes on the show and talks, the live show and talks about it, it's that idea that you can go from post-traumatic stress to going back to a point of normalcy, which is what I hear. But then afterwards, it sounds like you exploded with growth, post-traumatic growth, right? Yeah. And so what did the post-traumatic growth piece look like for you?
It was really organic.
Yeah.
It was really organic. It was, I guess this new version of me, I took ego out of the equation, or tried to, right, as best as I could. Wean myself off of the ego drug, and which was hard because that was a huge part of my downfall, was ego and pride and just, I don't know, this sense of I needed to show people who I was, right? And so when you take that out of the equation, everything becomes a lot less contrived,
right,
and a lot more organic. You're not doing something to show somebody that you're doing it. You're just doing it. That's it. And so anything I did, I was just doing it just to do it. Mm-hmm. So when I got to the place where everything started kind of clicking again, and my interpersonal relationships were better, we're starting to fix a lot of the relationships that I had broken. My relationship with my kids was great. I jumped back into work. That was the missing piece for me. There was this thing, there was this moment where I remember saying, I feel good, but I feel like 80% of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I very specifically said 80% of myself. And I guess at that moment, I was kind of like, you know what? I think I'm ready to jump back into work in a thoughtful way because I took some time off. And I think I was afraid to because work and that person were very connected. Work and that person were synonymous.
So your identity was based on your work and your outputs.
Yeah, very much so. And a lot of that ego was driven by my successes at work.
Sure.
So I guess.
And success is meaning money.
Money and just accomplishments too. I
Okay.
did some really cool stuff.
Okay.
You know, in my business. And so I think I had this fear of that post-traumatic stress, right? That fear of like, okay, if this happens again, immediately I'm going to feel the trauma again of what happened because I guess automatically I'm going to be that person again. If I have some kind of success again, I'm going to just turn it back into that guy. And there's that trauma, that anxiety that rings through you. It was really weird. And so I decided like I have to do this because I think that's what's missing. And so I started my company, Launchpad 516, where I was just consulting for small businesses at the time, me and an assistant, renting out 2 desks in somebody else's office. And then when success started happening there in a really small way, and it was helping people, that's where I felt whole again. I felt like 100% of myself.
Yeah.
And that was the moment that I realized, and this was a very key discovery for me personally, that it was not the success or the money or the adulation that I loved about my career before. It was just doing the damn thing. I love business. I love strategy. I love building things that are broken. You know, I love rebuilding things that are broken. And so that was so important for me to discover that. It was so important in the journey to say like, oh, maybe that bad stuff's not going to happen because that's not the part that's important to me. I just got to the root of it. Yeah. You know, and that's, and a side note on that, as you mentioned therapy before, I think that you should speak to a therapist when you really need guidance on finding that path. I think that's really the goal of therapy, right? There's somebody there that understands the roadmap and can actually take you on that journey. I think very early on in this, I realized that I have to be introspective. And I knew, and I sort of was delving into all this stuff myself. And sure, I could have used help in it, but I had a really good idea of what was going on, why I acted out in certain ways, and I sort of managed it. And I jumped into therapy later for a very short while just to make sure I was.
Let's make sure all the P's and Q's are checked off. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, well, you know, and I kind of have the same idea, a little bit divergent when it comes to therapy. That's something that is something that coaches can help with. If you're over you're over your past, right? You're over those days, right? And it looked like you were doing a lot of self work to get you out of languishing, right? Yeah. Because it was basically 80 and you wanted the Pareto's principle. What is the last 20%, which is usually a big piece because your kids will graduate. And then what happens when the PTAs, and
when you're left
coaching, right? Yep. But I do think that really where therapy comes into play is not only with helping you. Someone once said this to me. Therapy is, or coaching is you walking up to a locked fence and a coach will say, okay, we need to figure out how to get to the other side. Therapy is you walk up to a locked fence and the therapist will be like, okay, why is that locked? Yeah. Who locked that? Yeah. And so there's a continuum of care there, right? Yep. And and I think that therapy is really good, even as a way to prevent backslides. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't want to move past this though, but you went from pharma to a really small business consulting, and now where you're at here in the wonderful studios of the Launchcast, and Launchpad 516. What was that like to go from pharma, which is, and maybe I'm missing something here, to like full blown entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I realized that the part of pharma that I liked, it was never the pharmacy world itself, right? That sort of came pretty easily. The clinical side of things wasn't too exciting. I was always looking for the next thing, whether it was compounding pharmacy, long-term care, specialty pharmacy. Like, what can I challenge myself with? But the fun challenges for me were jumping into a business and making it better. So now I knew the business of pharmacy very well. And so working in a company that was not doing so well, not so profitable, and then putting my spin on it and helping to make it more powerful, that was exciting to me. That's what was really challenging. And there was a short while very early on in my career where we worked with a management consulting firm that helped us with some growth strategy. And I was like, dude, that's nuts. I said, when I'm done one day with pharma, I want to move on and do that.
So you had seen a consultant in action and what the outcomes could.
I was 25 and they helped us tremendously. They helped me very specifically tremendously during that time period because there was a rift where I worked. And I felt that I was a little undervalued. And then I was also on the other side of things being sort of a shitty employee because I felt undervalued.
Sure.
So it was like a give and take. And those guys helped me feel very valued. They helped management realize what a key piece I was, and vice versa. They helped me realize that I was, when I was working in a contemptible state, that it wasn't good for the business, and that's not how to react to a bad situation. Right. And so it was just a really, really cool experience, and I really wanted to get involved in that. So when I sort of jumped back into working, I was like, you know what? Let me just take this chance and jump into just consulting. I think I could apply these principles to any kind of business. And it was like, man, it took off. It was a very short test program that I was going to put out there, like a little pilot run of like, hey, if this doesn't work in 6 months, I got to jump back into pharma because I got to do what I got to do.
Right.
And I never had to.
And now we're sitting in a studio with these mics literally made of gold. I'm going to put it in the show notes. They're amazing. And I do want to talk about Launchpad for a second.
Sure.
Because the tenets of Launchpad aren't just business, right? You talk about leadership, business, life, and growth. Yeah. So this is almost like a holistic viewpoint of your clients. You know, when they go home, they have lives to lead. What does growth look like? You know, what does leadership look like? And what is your approach through Launchpad on sort of different pieces of the pie that create like this holistic individual?
Yeah. It's a people first approach. A couple of years into the company, that sort of became our motto. It was, hey, let's focus on the people. And I remember specifically the consult that changed it for me. It was a consult where it was a fairly small business, but it had like 35 employees, full-time employees, and then a lot of contract employees that worked on weekends at events. And I jumped in and did an analysis, and I was like, oh, this is all, everything wrong here is all because of like the people, because these people that work here, they feel undervalued. The people that own the company don't feel like their employees are bringing enough value to their positions. And I think there's a disconnect here.
Sure.
And so with that consult, it was the first time ever that it was a small enough company where 35 people, although a big task, wasn't too hard to sit down with everybody one-on-one. And we sat down with everybody and had a conversation. Talk to me about what you expected when you started working here versus what's happening now. What are your ideas on this company? Where do you think it's lacking? Where do you think it's thriving? And then we did the same conversation with management and C-level people. And then all we did was facilitate a meeting afterwards. We put two people in a room together and we go, okay, you wanted this person to be XYZ, but you wanted this job to be ABC. Let's talk about it, guys. Let's come up with a custom employment plan. If you, the ownership, feel that this employee needs some more tools, maybe you didn't provide them and train them with those tools initially when they started because you had a different expectation. So let's come up with a custom employment plan. Let's talk about goals. Let's bring, and when I would speak to these employees, I wouldn't just say, what are your goals here? I go, why are you here? What's
Right.
your driving factor?
Right.
That's a big deal with me. What's your driving factor?
Your internal motivation.
Yeah.
Right.
What is that? Is it your kids? Is it making money? What is that? And we would base their growth on that driving factor. All right. So for you to fulfill that motivation, what do we have to do here? You have a vehicle. You have a job right now. How are we going to drive this vehicle in a positive direction, right? Tell me what you need. Let's go to the ownership and tell them what you'd like to do. Are you fine in this position? Do you want a promotion one day? Do you want to eventually be a C-level person in this company?
Yeah.
Let's figure out a plan.
That's cool because it's almost like we're so used to the KPIs for the organization that we forget about the KPIs for the individual when it comes to growth.
Yeah.
I really like this idea of starting with people because you can read a lot of textbooks on organizational development, but really it's the things that happen that are not on the, the org charts, right?
Yeah.
It's those sort of interactions at the water cooler. It's the lack thereof at the water cooler. It's the microaggressions people feel when they're coming to work and they don't know why. I definitely see something like this, especially when you're talking about congruence and expectations and bringing the best out of people, turning something like where someone might say, well, this is just a temporary job, to almost switching it to be like, you know what? When I came here, I expected this to be like my calling.
Yeah.
And it is my calling.
Yeah.
Are you getting stuff like that?
Oh yeah, totally.
Wow.
Totally.
That's pretty transformative stuff there.
Totally.
That's pretty transformative stuff.
In this one specific company, we found a group of key people that were turned into managers that weren't. And we had found out through these conversations that the owner of the company, their children didn't want anything to do with this kind of business. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to build it up to a level where it was super successful and have somebody take over that cares about it. And so these managers, we talked to them and they were really, really close. And we go, would you guys ever want to run this company? Like take over it? And they were like, yeah. So we put a custom plan together to buy retirement time where they could potentially take over the business and buy the business. And all of a sudden the motivation completely changed.
Sure. I could totally see that. Like when you have a little stake in the game or a lot of stake in the game, then all of a sudden you're operating at full capacity, and you're also experiencing joy at full capacity as well. As you're telling these stories, I can't help but think of a younger George who may have wished that he had this conversation with somebody at some point. Am I picking up right on that?
Absolutely. Marc, I build everything I do off of experience. That's been my MO since day one with this business. And it's not the traditional journey. I'm about the unconventional leadership journey, right? That's
it's unconventional, baby.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
That's my thing. And so, the typical management consultant out there is an MBA from Wharton, any Harvard, whatever. That's not me. I went through, I don't want to say the school of hard knocks, but you get it. I think that's used way too often.
But your accent is perfect for you to say it.
Is. Hey, I went through the school of hard knocks. Hey. So, I went through all this and mostly not because it was done to me. It was like I experienced it because I made the mistakes myself. I learned how to be a good manager because I was a horrible manager to start with, and so you make these mistakes over and over and your situation changes and you get to try again and you go, well, this didn't work last time. Let me try it this way. And all of a sudden you learn. So I went from this uninspiring guy, right? This person that couldn't manage himself, let alone a team of people very early in my career, to a guy that learned to it was very tough always. And I learned this thing of like, all right, well, I got to a place now where I can manage this team and I don't necessarily inspire them, but they know that I know my shit. Yeah. Right. And so they may not always like me, but they always respect me. Right. Okay. And now to a place where I feel like I can inspire people. I feel like I can be that charismatic leader in a very authentic way because that's just who I now am. It's my authentic self.
Yeah. You know what? I feel very similar in terms of the way that, I've had a Facebook Live show for quite a bit. not the Golden Mike podcast, but the Golden Mike Live. And there is a lot of persona there, but at the core of it, there's this wanting to return to a point in my life in which I had opportunities on a regular basis to have conversations with people who were very dissimilar to me. And I chose not to have those conversations. And I chose to be with people who I thought were similar to me. And I couldn't connect with anybody else.
Right.
And so, that's why the Golden Mike actually started, was because of the fact that it's never too late. And I can return to that, kind of young 20-year-old guy who wished internally that he could connect, but was too shy to do it.
Sure.
And so that's what, I can definitely relate to that. I want to talk a little bit about, these 4 pillars again, because when I see these 4 pillars, leadership, business, life, growth, the word that just pops up is balance. And I have a feeling that you don't have a traditional take on balance. No. You're a guy that, you get up, you spend time with your kids, you give everything to your work. We'll get into things like Speakers Who Dare, TED Talks. I mean, you're always out there. What does this idea of balance look like? Hey, it's Marc. I hope you're digging the Golden Mike podcast. If you have or are just starting your own revolution fueled by joy, there's a site I created for you. If you, like me, believe that personal growth is simply not enough, if you, like me, are committed to changing history for the better in both micro and macro ways, check out joyrevolution.com. In there, you'll find an archive of our over 200 Golden Mike Live Facebook shows, and of course, our podcast that you're currently listening to. Check out the blogs highlighting how positive psychology and joy theory apply to your everyday life. There's even some cool clips from our Joy Revolution course geared towards influencers, speakers, writers, and change agents. It's all there. Go to joyrevolution.com. That's joyrevolution.com. Let's get back to the episode.
So this didn't all work for me initially. I worked on so many parts of myself that it was like growth had become compartmentalized. So I worked on the dad. I worked on the partner, the boyfriend, the eventual husband. I worked on the friend. I worked a little bit on the leader as in terms of being in my community as a leader. And I worked on the guy at work, but going from one place to another and trying to be like this different person every time, it proved to be a little bit difficult because I felt very disjointed. Yeah. Right. You don't want those different people to be just personas. You want them to be yourself.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the more you were talking about this, and I was actually talking to a previous guest, Jazz Bianchi, about this. The more we put roles in our life, our psyche needs a way to navigate through that. So we develop personas or masks and stuff like that, right? Sure. And so here you were with, like, depending on the mask that you were wearing, you're like, this is what I need to grow in right now. And nothing else, all the other masks, it sounds like we're just kind of waiting for you to pick them up and grow. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very compartmentalized way of doing things. And I also think that's a very conventional way that a lot of people look at it. Even in coaching, they have this thing called the wheel of life, where you go around the wheel, right? Yeah. And it's what aspect of your life do you want to work on today? Which means which persona do you want to grow right now? So even in the coaching world, they have things like that.
But when you think about it, or when I thought about it at least, I always try to think differently. I always try to look at things from different perspectives, different viewpoints. That's what makes me successful at what I do in terms of business. So I sort of looked at life that way at a certain point, and it didn't feel natural. The only through line throughout this whole thing was, throughout these different personas, was that I just didn't want any of them to be a shithead. right? As long as none of them were shitheads, none of those personas, and they were all like trying to be good people, then I was okay with it. But I felt too disjointed. So I kind of asked myself one day, like, why do they have to be different personas? Why can't I just be that person in all aspects of my life? And it proved to be just this weird phenomenon in my life. And so that's something I speak about in my leadership coaching, and I call it the balance phenomenon, where this moment where I realized that bringing all of those aspects into my life to the forefront at the same time and managing them as one person rather than putting these different masks on, that made me feel like the complete person, right? And so it was like that moment where Luke gets the Force, right? That moment where Neo understands the Matrix. It was like, I just got it. Everything just snapped into place, and that balance helped me to be better at every one of those. I wasn't trying hard to be a good dad and a company owner and a husband and this and that. I was just trying hard to be a good George.
Yeah.
And that was it.
And now you're looking at ecstatic growth now, right? You're looking at a profound amount of growth as a result of you really being able to take off the masks and get to what many psychologists call your true personality. Yeah. The true personality is the Gorge and the Marc that walk around. No cameras, none of these golden mics around, and no one's watching. And that's that's the truest form of ourselves when no one is watching. I am curious, Gorge, what is the Gorge like when nobody's watching?
He's the same guy.
Really?
He's just a more introspective version when nobody's watching. When nobody's watching, I do my best thinking in the shower, in the car.
Don't we all?
It's when I just, and I love having music on in the background, but I get into the shower now and I shut the radio off and I go, all right, what am I going to think about here? What's my next inspiration? What's my next motivational moment? You mentioned before, I just had my 40th birthday, and last night was my surprise party that my wonderful wife put together. I knew something was coming. And 40,
sure. 40. Well, it was the big one.
40 was a really strange moment for me. I love my birthdays. I'm not that guy that hates getting older. It doesn't affect me at all. But 40 was really weird because it closed off a very weird decade for me. Closed off a decade that started very harshly and ended off as the most wonderful time in my life, right? And so I've been very introspective the last few weeks. And one of my shower moments of thinking was, if there's a party going on and all the people I love in my life are there, I feel the need to acknowledge what they have done for me in terms of my growth, because they were a big part of it. And so I was writing my speech in my head in the shower, and I knew deep down that I wasn't going to give that speech, that it was just my way of just acknowledging my growth, which is okay.
Right.
It's important for you to acknowledge your own growth.
It's like a Calvin and Hobbes moment, right? Where you're especially in the shower when, you're, I forgot, I think sometimes you'll go into theta waves, right? Which is the very creative, suggestible part of your mindset. Sometimes if you're running, right? You just start going unconscious or working out or whatever. And it sounds like a very Calvin and Hobbes moment where it's like, oh, if this were to happen, this is what I would do. And we do it for ourselves, right? Yeah. Just as sort of this reflective piece. Tell me you're one of those guys in the shower that has like those waterproof paper that you're at. I am.
That's great.
I always slip on the pencil because it always falls down. Here we are right now, 40 years old, doing, and it wasn't just Launchpad. Your growth has continued into things like public speaking. We met at an amazing event called Speakers Who Dare. Yeah. And then again, for Farmingdale, you just curated a pretty amazing TEDx, the first ever TEDxFarmingdale. What is the intrinsic motivation for you right now? What is, for lack of better term, what is your joy revolution? Why are you continuing this? You're making good money. You don't have to be here on a Saturday or a Sunday doing a podcast.
I think that I have a responsibility. My joy revolution is the responsibility I feel towards leadership. And I cannot pinpoint one specific role in that responsibility. And I think that's sort of my answer, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I think I've been given a gift to I guess, be skilled in a lot of different areas, right? Whether it's speaking or my business consulting or marketing or whatever. I think I have a skill, an above average skill in a lot of those areas. And I don't want to use that just for me. I think I can help other people with that skill set. And I think when you're given a gift like that, it becomes a responsibility in terms of your leadership to get out there and just spread it. And so I haven't found one specific area that I want to share it in, because I'm one of those guys that's just into a lot of different things. And so it's my muse, change is my muse. Right. So I want to get out there into the newest thing I'm involved in, the new thing I learned, and just spread that leadership in any way that I can.
And you've never felt anything like resentment for the fact that, okay, here I am seeing things in a different way than everybody else. Like, oh my gosh, things are falling on my shoulders to coordinate again, to coach again. You've never felt any level of resentment with that?
No, you know why though?
Why?
That's the balance phenomenon. That's the balance phenomenon for me, because it's my own fault when I didn't balance it, right? So I'll talk about TEDxFarmingdale, okay? TEDxFarmingdale was an amazing, crazy, horrible, wonderful time for me, because I brought my new muse of TED, right? I had a 2 or 3 year obsession with TED and TEDx's and public speaking, and I did 2 of my own. I presented 2 of my own TEDx talks. I met you at Speakers Who Dare, which was supposed to be my 3rd one, TEDx Lincoln Square, and then they shifted to Speakers Who Dare. And so after having gone through that Speakers Who Dare experience and meeting Trisha Brook and Jamie Broderick, and just seeing this wonderful community they built, that's when I decided to jump in and use my own resources to be able to provide a platform like this for people that I thought would be great vehicles for spreading important messages. And so I put together TEDxFarmingdale, and it was twofold, because not only did it allow those voices to be heard, but it brought this wonderful event to my hometown, which is so important to me.
Right.
And so I jumped in and I dove in head first, and I said, I will work with these speakers in a thoughtful way. I will bring experienced speakers. I will bring non-experienced speakers. The through line is just going to be people that are there for change. That's all I care about. As long as you are here to create change and you're not just here to push your own personal agenda, you're on the team. If you don't have the skill set, I will work tirelessly to help provide you with the tools to acquire that skill set. And so I worked tirelessly with some of these speakers that were brand new, right? Guys like you that were on there that have done this before and are wonderful speakers. It wasn't really much work. It was more like creative collaboration, which is another muse of mine. Like, I love doing that with people.
But you did push me as well. There were times where you're like, this is not Marc.
Yeah.
Right?
And I love that what you actually wound up with on stage was Marc. And I hope that I was a little part of that spark for you.
Oh, absolutely. It was. I mean, I had a huge spark moment when you came back and you were like, Marc would never say this.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's true. Marc would never say it. I was thinking too much of the performance aspect, where I was letting other people tell me what a good TEDx looks like. And you really permitted me to go and say, a good TEDx from Marc looks like Marc being himself. And you also, it was the first time someone called me out and said, I do know that Marc from the Golden Mike Live is not the true Marc. It's just a persona Marc. And so I think that was the first time there was a live appearance of not the Golden Mike Marc or Vanilla Ice, but really this true personality Marc of what you would see when you're hanging out with me.
Yeah.
So given all of this, right? You know, I know that you were talking about you're not quite sure what it looks like when it comes to this responsibility of leadership, but I do think that there's obviously you derive a lot of joy from what you're doing, and you're also kind of revolutionizing the way we think of leadership, right? I'm sitting here, I'm looking out here at the Launchpad, set up and it's set up for leadership classes. I think you've got some things coming up the pipe when it comes to leadership.
I do.
What is this leadership revolution that you're leading?
Yeah. So the leadership experience is, I guess, the latest incarnation of how I want to disseminate this leadership message, this unconventional journey of mine. I've come to discover that a lot of the leaders that I have met lately had really unconventional journeys that are so interesting, right? And that appeals to me because I personally don't derive much inspiration from sitting in a class that's a very structured framework that's the book learning, right?
The book learning, yeah.
That's for acquiring knowledge.
Right.
That's not for acquiring inspiration generally, right?
Are you literally setting up a school of hard knocks? Is that what you're doing? Are you really structuring a school of hard knocks?
I think for me, engagement has always come in telling your story and having somebody go, "Oh, I went through something like that," or, "Oh man, that's not what I thought the leadership journey looked like. I can do that."
Right.
I can fall flat on my face and lose everything and then just be an authentic person and start over and become successful.
Or break an arm.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Roller derby.
Yeah.
And so when people hear those kind of stories, not just from me, but from others, it becomes really inspirational and important. It's an integral part of bringing more leaders to the forefront. And so the leadership experience is a coaching masterclass that I put together that's going to be starting this January. And I'm so excited about it because I've taken this unconventional journey and sort of broken it up into different parts of my journey that were really important in sparking change for me. And I think if a group of people can take this class and it sparks some kind of change for them and brings them to the leadership forefront, then I've accomplished something. Yeah,
I'm also hearing something that maybe hidden at my Filipino collectivist mentality, but I'm hearing the idea of doing this as collective. Hawaiian culture calls this your hui, right? This is the group, the family that you go through things with. Now, I know you did it for TEDx. You did it in a way in which we all felt as if we're in this together.
Yeah.
We pull each other up when someone's down. We've got each other's backs. And at your party last night, it was still the same way. It was like a reunion, right? It's like we almost were all freshmen living in the same hall, right? And then 20 years later, it's like, oh my God, you didn't you still look hot, right?
That actually happened.
It did. But talk about this idea. I mean, and am I off the mark here about how important that is to you in terms of people learning from people in a hui?
Yeah. No, that we've talked about this before. The community aspect for me, for my way of teaching leadership is so important. The community aspect makes my life a little bit easier because there's a few different aspects of I guess the way I disseminate a message. And one of them is to get a group of like-minded people together that are going to lift each other and help support that message where I can't explain it. So if I'm trying to explain let's say just leadership, if I'm trying to explain some facet of leadership and somebody's not connecting with that specific facet, maybe somebody else in the group that understands that will help to uplift that. They'll help lift me so that their fellow group member can understand better.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that I'm thinking about is your approach is that everyone who's a part of this is both a learner and a teacher, right? And I've definitely experienced that in the Joy Revolution where, I'll go off and I'll get really empirical and data driven, and someone else will chime in and say, you mean it's like this metaphor? And then the whole class lights up.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that it's this sort of collective effervescence that you feel. And then when you leave the room, the leadership is sticky.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Now, what is your definition of leadership? Because it is a different approach that you're taking to it.
It is.
And is it a different definition as well?
I think leadership in the sense of what I'm trying to put out there is a living thing. I don't think there's, if it makes sense, I don't think there's a definition that you could actually stamp onto leadership because it looks so different for everybody. I talk about leadership in my class in the form of, where are you a leader? Where do you want to be a leader? So the first question I ask is, what do you hope to get out of this class? Where are you trying to lead? Is it in your home? Is it in your community? Or is it at your work? Right? I think those are the three different divisions that I see in terms of leadership. And it looks different because maybe somebody just wants to be a better father.
Right.
I remember a time where I couldn't be a leader for my kids right before I got divorced because I wasn't putting out the kind of stuff that they should be picking up at all. But there was a certain point where I kind of looked at the situation and I go, yeah, I think I'm a good example now.
Yeah.
I think we can look back and if I continue on this path and I get hit by a bus in 10 years, I think my kids would look back and go, that was a good man, putting some good stuff out there. And so,
except he shouldn't have been walking on the highway. What a dumbass. Right. So at the risk of being a contrarian,
yeah,
very risky of being a contrarian. One of the things that I'm seeing is your approach to leadership almost is like you identify the area of your life where you want to become more of a leader. We were talking a little bit earlier in terms of your progression and how you took off all of your persona masks to become a full Gorge. Wouldn't that be counter in terms of the, breaking leadership off into sort of different areas? Or what am I missing here?
So this is what I found in my years of running this company. I've dealt with a lot of people and a lot of expectations and managing expectations, right? And something that I found is that my definition of success, let's just say in the workplace first, my definition of success is not the same as another person's definition of success. So let's say Gorge is not an owner anymore. Gorge is an employee at a company, at a brand new company. It's this Gorge now, right? But the 25-year-old version, very young, new to working in the professional realm. And I know what Gorge's path is going to be. He's going to do his job. He's going to be looking at what's the next step. How do I get there? And at the same time, he's going to look at the highest step and go, how can I get there in 10 years? And that Gorge is going to put a strategy together to be running that company within 10 years. Now, you meet Bobby down the block working for another company. Bobby's fine right where he is. Bobby doesn't want to run that company. Bobby wants to go to work, get a paycheck, have a nice union job, have his benefits, and go home at 5 o'clock every day and be with his family and be a good dad. And Bobby doesn't care about that other aspect of it. And so realizing that not everybody has the same aspirations as you is really important in terms of being a leader as well. But in teaching this coaching class, it's almost like talking to them first and asking them, what does leadership look like for you? If they tell me it's similar to my view of leadership, then we're going to talk about all of it. Right. But I think that at the risk of putting in a little extra work for myself in doing this class, and I'm still learning, by the way, I think it's okay to sort of build a custom plan for everybody because not everybody's going to be looking for the same outcome.
And it makes sense because you've been creating custom plans, sitting down with people ever since you started Launchpad, saying, what is it that you expect to get out of this? It makes complete sense. The contrarian got. Yeah. Because yes, it's about Gorge or the people leading this program saying, what do you guys want out of it? And then you can create a specific plan. You can create that personal KPI plan of of folks. George, we're not done yet, man. So I don't want you checking your email on me here if you're getting bored. But I want to play. Since we're so early in this podcast, in the realm of the Golden Mike podcast, I want to play a little game with you, and that's complete the sentence.
Yeah.
And it can be a one-word answer, or it can be this really detailed prose that you want to add to it, right?
Go for it.
So I want you to finish this. Home is
everything. Home is everything. That is my base. That is my foundation. Home is home, right? Home is my wife, my kids. That balance has taught me that that's my true home. This office that we're in right now, this is another area that I love to be in. This is not my home. This is not what matters in the end. It's my wife, my kids, my family, my friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Revolution is
necessary. We cannot expect change unless we step up and say, I'll do it. That is, you asked me my definition of leadership. I can't tell you for everybody what it is. I can't put that definition on you. My definition of leadership is somebody needs to stand up and say, I'll do it.
Gotcha.
Right.
Joy is
hard to attain sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. Hard to attain sometimes. For me, I had to figure out a lot of shit, man. It took me a solid, and I think I said this in a comment on one of your Golden Mike live shows recently when you had a guest on that we both know. It took me almost 35 years before I felt totally comfortable in this skin. No more masks, no more anything. And that was true joy for me. I had moments of joy, but like the steady stream of joy came when I figured that shit out. I was George.
Okay.
And comfortable as George.
Okay. So joy is comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want you to remember those because I'm going to do a magic trick with you right now.
Got it.
And if this doesn't work, Joe Fern, cut it out. So instead of home is, revolution is, and joy is, I want you to still answer it in the same way, as if home is the first question, and as if revolution is the second question, and as if joy is the third question. Except I want you to say it as I am. Okay. So I am
everything. I am home.
I am.
I forgot.
You motherfucker. All right. So we're going to cut that out, or we'll keep that in. That didn't work. I gave it a shot.
It was my understanding there would be no math on this.
and I was like, when you were saying all that stuff, I was like, oh, we're fucked with this one, man. But it was worth a shot. But also at the same time, it is good for us as we're talking about these heady things to think about what it is to embody some of the things. Like for you, revolution, you talked about it, joy, you talked about it, and home, you talked about it. And so I just simply want to know what it means for you to embody that. Yeah. When you're in joy, what is that experience like? Because we can talk about it from the meta.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, like, joy literally is the point where Zach will fall asleep and I get to put my hands through his hair. Yeah. And I'm like, God, he's growing up so fast, man. Yeah. Right. Or joy is, joy is my dad who is a wacky, amazing man who's lived a great life. Yep. And though his memory is diminishing, listening to him play Que Sera, Sera on the piano perfectly.
Wow.
Right. And those are moments for the listeners, for George and I to push you to think about, when is joy embodied? What does your revolution look like? And how are you embodying that? What does home look like for you? George, what are you being called to talk about right now at this point in this interview?
I think I'm being called to talk about what joy means to me in terms of how joy is embodied in my daily life.
Right.
I think that's that's really what we're trying to figure out right here. I think there's a path that we all go on to discovering our joy.
Right.
And so it's really, I guess, trying to figure out, I think it's really opening your eyes enough to see what that joy is in your life. I think that's so important. And it sort of correlates to how I look at things in terms of my leadership. Realizing when there's a spark moment, that's joy for me, right? Those moments where you just go, oh shit, that was a big one. That was a big one. That's going to be one of those ones that I will never forget. This was just a pivotal moment in my life. That's joy for me. Mm-hmm. That moment when the balance comes together, where I just pulled off a crazy month of being a dad and a husband and an employer and inspiration to others and a podcaster and whatever. And I pulled it off in a thoughtful way, and I created some good there, and I was of service to others. That's joy, you know? So it's like just realizing when those moments happen and acknowledging them and taking that information forward in your life to continue feeling joy and creating joy. That's what we're trying to figure out here.
Yeah, that is what we're trying to figure out here. I am also curious about this idea of, this is a positive psychology question that's asked quite a bit, but I think it's really salient for the story that you've told today. 40-year-old George, right? Gets in his DeLorean, right, and goes to 25-year-old George. If you had about 30 seconds to talk to 25-year-old George, what would you tell him?
I've done this before.
Yeah.
I've done this. I've had a few sort of introspective posts on social media where I've done this. Mm-hmm. I don't want to change anything for him. I would say to George, it's going to be okay, man. You're about to go through some shit. The next few years of your life are going to lead you to being a person you never thought you'd be, and then it's all going to hit the fan, but you got to stay the course and know that you will go back, or you will become that person that you were, that you once were, and the person that you always wanted to be. I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give him is those are one and the same. The person you were and the person you want to be, they're the same person. You just sort of haven't realized it yet, and you're trying to force it. You're trying to have these moments that are really contrived to show people who you are, and that's not who you are. It's a mask, right? Connect with that person that you were, and guess what? That's the person that you want to be. That's your actual George. That's what I would tell him. I look back, man, and it's so crazy. I was this guy. I had a lot of idols when I was younger. I was a big TV guy, a big movie guy, right? And these idols for me, and I had this conversation with my kids the other day. It was awesome. And we could talk about that if you want. But we talked about idols versus heroes.
Wow.
Right? Huge conversation.
Wow.
And I had a lot of idols when I was younger, and I tried to be those people.
Yep.
I was a big TV head, and so I'd see the Zach Morrises, the Uncle Jesses, and I'd be like, yeah, I want to be that guy.
You wanted to be Uncle Jesse.
Can I tell you something?
I wonder why.
I am Uncle Jesse.
You wanted to be Uncle Jesse.
You know, and it was like you put on these personas where you're just like trying to be this person you're not, and it's just like you're constantly just fake. You know?
Yeah.
It's really weird. So yeah, man, I would just tell him to stay the course, because guess what, man? You need to go through this shit to figure out who George is.
Well, let's get back in the DeLorean and let's go 15 years in the future.
Yeah.
What would 55-year-old George say to you right now?
Yeah. He would.
Don't tell me you did another Facebook post on that.
I didn't do a Facebook post.
You've definitely reflected on it.
I've reflected on it in the last few days.
Yeah.
In the last few days. I think reflecting, turning 40 and just reflecting on all these points in my life, right? It's like you realize what's important at that time frame. There's the person, and then there's just like the masses of like, okay, the person George did this and that, right? But then there's like everybody in their 20s does this kind of thing. Everybody in their 30s does. And so I was thinking about this guy in my 40s now, and then going to go into my 50s in 10 years. What's going to be important to him? Because I have heard that you do your stupid shit in your 20s, right? In your 30s, you're focused on drive and success in a big way. And in your 40s is when you chill back and start to reflect and just enjoy that life, your 40s and then your 50s. And so I wondered that. I was kind of like, is this going to turn into sort of like this, not sedentary, but just like, I'm going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to really choose what I want joy to look like for me forever and just kind of stay there? Or am I going to keep grinding, keep the wheels turning? Because that's important to me too. I love keeping the iron sharp. You know?
I don't, you know what, as involved and engaged as you are, I don't see much grinding. Do you feel the grind?
No, sometimes I do. And that's part of the balance.
Right.
Where you got to go, I need to take it back a little bit. I need to refocus my efforts right now. I did that this past year. I was in a little bit of a grind and I wasn't finding much joy in my work. And I had to sort of take it back and go, all right, here are some non-work projects that I was involved in that brought me a lot of joy. Let me see if I could bring some of those elements into my work now. That's where this coaching masterclass came from. That's where this podcast came from. You know, bringing these into my work now and combining these worlds.
I definitely see that, you know, we, as passionate as we can get about things, there's always maybe an administrative piece here or something gets blown out in another part of your life there. I think with Ted, you know, there were things that I didn't know were going on with you. I think I kind of had an idea, but you were still moving that forward. Can you actually talk more about what was going on there?
Sure.
Because I think that might be a great example of about, you know, the things coming with grace and ease and joy, and then
Sure. Yeah. So there was a lot of that balance phenomenon that I had to sort of put into this situation because I really dove into TEDxFarmingdale. I dove into working with the speakers, helping them to have meaningful talks. And so it became this really involved work, and it was actually taking some time away from my actual work, you know? And at the same time, we got some bad news. My dad got a little sick, and that was something that rocked my world out of nowhere. My dad's my guy, and it was really, really tough.
What do you mean by little sick?
So he has prostate cancer. And so,
Sorry.
you know, it was, he's okay now. He's, we took the summer and the fall to kind of work on all of that, but it was, sort of rocked our world. It was early stage, so everything was fine. I don't want to use this as like a dramatic piece, but, for us, it was dramatic because he's our guy. You know?
Oh yeah, that's dramatic.
That's my pop.
Yeah.
And we have never, and my side of the family, dealt with anything like that. And so, you know, hearing that just rocked our worlds, and I didn't have much time to breathe because my dad was just in complete shock. My mom, who isn't usually an emotional person, was super emotional. And so I kind of realized that I had to be that rock.
Yeah.
I had to jump in, you know, two immigrants here that aren't really well versed in medicine, and this is what I did back in the day. And so I had to jump in and take control of his care, and the doctors and the radiation and the whole thing. And it was a little scary, but what was cool was when I jumped in, there was a comfort level for him that totally changed. Like, he became very comfortable that he wasn't going to have to manage this. He could trust me with this. And we did some doctor's visits, and everything was looking good. After, a few months, we'd be okay, and made him feel at ease. And that's part of the battle, is just that positivity. Right. Sure. And so dealing with this while TED is going on, I knew that I couldn't just drop TED, it was a commitment that I made. I don't shirk my commitments, and it was something that I was really passionate about, and I had to still do it. And so balancing that with my personal life, with being a dad and a husband and a business owner, was damn near impossible, man.
Did you want to drop TED?
I almost broke. No, I never. In my mind, when you check off the list.
Did you ever have?
It was never a reality. No,
okay.
It wasn't even.
I'll find a replacement or anything.
No, it was, and I had a team that if I would have called them and said, "Hey guys, this is what's going to happen," they would have.
Yeah, it was a rock solid team.
They would have killed it. wasn't even a thought. Wasn't even a thought. I knew in the grand scheme of things, if George is putting together the realistic list of here, what are my options here? Of course, it's an option. Was never even a thought of mine. But I sort of dove into TED as an escape. Working with all the speakers, including you. I found a little joy in what I was doing that helped not take my mind off of my dad or anything else going on, but I'm the type of person, and you'll be able to tell me better than anybody since you're a positive psychologist.
The best.
When something's heavy on me, when something's going on and it's stressful, my creativity goes away completely.
Absolutely.
I cannot get in the creative mindset, and I hate that because my creativity is everything to me.
Well, the first thing that goes when you go into fight or flight is creativity.
Yeah.
Because you're in fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
You're in full on, survival mode. And I would say if you were to take one of those strengths finders or whatever, your creativity would be off the charts, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like resilience is off the charts for you.
So.
Yeah.
I think so. And we've talked about this.
We have talked about it.
Yeah. You have an amazing assessment tool
it's
that
the
we
best.
sat with. And it was, I got to say, it was so incredible. Yeah. It was like looking into a crystal ball of my life. It was crazy.
Yeah, I know exactly what color underwear you're wearing as a result of you taking the energy leadership
Don't you talk
index.
to Jesus like that.
Don't you talk to Jesus like that. Oh.
That's an inside joke. And so what was so cool with the process was I actually had a creative outlet during a really traumatic fight or flight time. And so I could shut the door on everything else for an hour, have a meeting with you to collaborate on your TEDx talk, and feel like the iron was still sharp. And that was so important to me because I wasn't losing myself in the trauma.
Right.
And that was very cool. And so that and getting you guys helping me get through my process, me helping you guys get through your process, having a wife at home that understands how completely insanely dedicated I am to everything I do, and loving that part of me was so important to the process, right? So all of that stuff just created this huge balance for me that was, I don't know, it was magical. It was like, it was just so cool. And it was one of those times where the balance helped me kind of get through a tough time in my life and come out with positivity and joy.
You know, we were talking about personas earlier. George, I can't help but think that when you took off the TEDx persona and the strong son persona, that Colleen might have seen a few breakdown moments. Was that something that happened at all, or
I think possibly.
Yeah. Here you are talking about, obviously you were off the charts in terms of the resilience. You're getting people through their TEDx's. That's obviously an adaptation for you to help you. It's a pattern that I'm seeing. It's a pattern that when things start to dip for you, you give harder, I'm not sure if you're conscious of that, but like it's a total pattern that I'm seeing. But I can't help but think that when you took off the personas, George, when you took off TEDx, the TEDx mask, or you took off the strong sun mask, I can't help but think that there was a couple nights, even with all this resilience and adaptation that you were using, that you might have been having a few breakdown moments with Colleen, the personality, George, that not a lot of people get to see. Is that an assumption?
No, it's totally true.
Okay.
Totally true. It was weird because very early on, after I found out about my dad being sick, it was a lot. It was heavy on me. What was heaviest was hearing my mom get emotional because she's not that person. And that made me strangely emotional, like going, oh man, like this is heavy, And so I wanted to let it out early on, but with everything going on, I guess internally I wasn't ready. I allowed myself a few moments at home with Colleen to talk about it and possibly sit and cry a little bit, and it wouldn't come out,
Oh,
it was weird.
Really?
It was weird. maybe because I was in touch with it already and just I internally knew like it's not time yet. Like you gotta right now, it's time to just be the strong one for now. But yeah, then all of a sudden it would just come in dribs and drabs. I never had like a complete all out breakdown. And I'm an emotional guy. I'm a mush.
You're a total mush.
Yeah, I'm a total mush. And, I've gotten glassy eyed talking about this even a couple of times. And, I think it was partly because I needed to stay positive for him.
Yeah.
Partly because of the inspiration that I was drawing from TEDxFarmingdale happening. I don't know what it was, but yeah. I think just being in touch with my feelings about it was enough for me at the time. But I did have a couple of small breakdowns that Colleen was there for, and I needed them, and we pushed through.
And that's good because it releases what we call that catabolic energy, that fight or flight energy, to give you space to be able to do a TEDx. Now, let's go hypothetical, right? Yep. You're a dude that lives full out, man, right? Full out work, full out growth. Yep. Full out family. What happens if something did happen to Dad? I mean, prostate is the real deal, man.
Yeah.
And you caught it early. But, I don't want to get too dark on this, but what happens to George if something did happen and you made that decision? I'm moving forward with TEDx.
Not something I've even thought about. I don't think I could put myself in that mindset. Because it's too much. It's the one that would potentially, I don't want to say break me. I think I'm past that.
Yeah.
I don't think at this point in my life right now, I can be broken.
Right.
Because I realize the gravity of what my leadership holds, in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Mostly from my family.
Right. And I think the thing there is that, not only with your creativity, living full out means really living regardless of fear, right? And that's what I saw you doing, as you were telling this story. A lot of people could fold up shop. Oh my gosh, something's going to happen. We need to get all hands on deck here. Sorry, guys. I know that you can understand. But, really being like the 4 agreements, a person of your word, and following through on that is something that, I see as being important to you. Do you have any regrets if this was your last day?
Yeah, I have regrets. I regret some of the hurt I've caused other people. I've gone through all that internally and forgiven myself for a lot of situations, which I think is necessary after you've been introspective enough to understand what you did, why you did it, and sort of changed your position. But I regret some of the people I've hurt. I don't necessarily regret anything I've gone through because it shaped me into who I am.
Right. So you kind of you were able to let it go. But there was obviously opportunity there, and in regret and in hurting people and, letting things go, there's still always opportunity there. And what was the opportunity that you took to grow from that?
Yeah, it was the opportunity for growth itself. It was the opportunity for reflection and growth. The way I operate from a consulting standpoint is that I learn from mistakes, right? I look at mistakes that a company has made. I look at mistakes that people have made, and we look at those mistakes and go, why did we make those mistakes? What can we learn from those mistakes, and how can we better them? For me personally, it was always those mistakes. For me, they were my biggest weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And it was so important for me to turn those not into non-weaknesses, but my strengths.
Right.
My greatest strengths. When I look at it from a work perspective, I was a horrible manager early on. Right. That's one of my greatest strengths.
Is that why you have the Michael Scott?
Yes.
You have a Michael Scott cup there.
But it's become one of my greatest strengths is training managers now and talking to them about what mistakes not to make, how to look at your mistakes and not look at them as in a negative light. Mistake equals practice. That's what I said in my first TEDx talk.
Yeah.
Mistake equals practice. It's practice for the big game.
Yeah.
If you're making a mistake now, it's okay. Big game hasn't come yet. Let's learn from it. Let's make it better. Let's make it a strength.
Yeah. I love that because oftentimes I see a lot of people, they'll make a mistake and then they'll go into sort of this warped form of self-forgiveness, but self-forgiveness from the standpoint of I didn't learn anything, so I can just forgive myself and repeat the same behavior over and over and over again.
Sure.
And so it's really cool that both you personally as well as the company looks at the mistakes as those opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
Now, you've said it all. But we're going to have you back on the show, George. I want to finish with one final thing, and it's going back to that shower scene. I don't know why, but you in the nude coming up with ideas is just, I think, the most fitting way that we should all, listening to this podcast, think about George. Now, it was your 40th birthday this week.
Yeah.
We talked about it to begin the show. In the shower, you came up with a little thank you statement, or you came up with a little talk.
Yeah.
If something were to go down and people were celebrating your birthday, you didn't have the opportunity to give the talk.
Yeah.
I think this might be a nice time if you are so inclined to give that in the nude shower talk.
Hold on, let me take my shirt off.
Well, I mean, your pants are already off, so
Perfect.
might as well take the shirt off.
Don't mind my nipple tassels.
Yeah, no, I minded, but that's why I was looking through you, not at you.
I put this together. I don't think I ever expected to give it. I just wanted to really reflect on it and think about it because it was so important. What I wanted to say was that I think back to my 30th birthday. My 30th birthday, I was in a bar celebrating with all my friends. I got knocked down drunk, and I didn't have a drinking problem or anything like that, but I got knocked down drunk. I was being peeled off of the bathroom floor at 4 a.m. and thrown into my wife at the time's truck and driven home and completely hungover for the next 2 days. And during the course of that night, I just remember being completely out of control. And it was really a metaphor for what was going on in my life at that time. And I look at tonight, or what would have been my 40th birthday party, and I'm so excited at this growth. And I could not have done it without every single person in this room, right? And that was what I really wanted to get across to everybody, that this is a team game. We're a community here, right? We build as a community. And so it was really important for me to acknowledge everybody and their role in my growth, right? The people that were there beforehand didn't give up on me. And they took this journey with me. And I think we came out the other side together in a really positive, joyful way. And the people that aren't here anymore, I'm sorry. Maybe we just weren't meant to be in each other's lives anymore. But just know that you helped me learn a lesson at some point of who I shouldn't be, who this real George shouldn't be. But what actually came out of my mouth was, thank you so much. I love every single one of you. Thank you. That's what I actually said, because it just encompassed it all, Yeah.
And I was invited to this 40th.
You were
right?
invited, and I cannot believe you flew to New York from Tampa. Unbelievable.
I mean, we have to do the golden mic on the 40th because this is 40, baby.
Yes.
I can't wait to do some more of these with you over the years, George.
Yeah,
I do consider you, bromance aside, I do consider you a good friend, a mentor, a pal, someone I mentor.
Same,
I mean,
buddy.
it's just
Absolutely.
really great and symbiotic. But before, listeners don't want to hear the love fest, so we're gonna end it right now. More so, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Go find your joy. What does that look like for you? What does your revolution look like for you? And what does home look like for you? George, Andriopoulos, thank you so much. This has been the Golden Mike Podcast. Take care. This is Marc. Bye. I hope you enjoyed the Golden Mike Podcast. There's more good stuff coming your way. But until the next episode, let's stay in touch, yes? Find us on Instagram as The Joy Rev, or communicate with like-minded revolutionaries in our Facebook group. Search The Joy Revolution Underground. And of course, don't forget to check out the classes, articles, blogs, and some serious fun at joyrevolution.com. That's joyrevolution.com. Now, until then, what will you do to change history for the better? Let's go out and play, shall we? Press start to begin.